Michael,
Yeah.
looking a little bit toasty there.
Yeah, that's what I heard. That's what I feel. We went to some soccer games, and we thought that they were going to be... This was Saturday.
Okay.
So these were rescheduled soccer games for Karis. It's her fault. I'm blaming her officially.
Blame Karis. I'm cool with it.
And we thought that we were going to PCA, Palmetto Christian Academy, in Mount Pleasant. And while we're en route Saturday morning, we get a text. Oh, the address in the Game Changer is wrong. We're going to this recreational field. Now, it probably changes a little bit, but not a lot. Because in a stadium, you have places of shade. You have structures, maybe a concession stand. I don't know.
Yeah.
But we were like out in the middle of a field.
Just like a complex, just like boom.
Yeah, flat field. In fact, we were sitting on the grass because we had some stadium chairs, but most people didn't.
Yeah.
So we thought if we could just set our flat stadium chairs on the ground, we could have some back support and allow others to sit in the little small, tiny bleachers that they had there. So we're kind of
thinking about other people. That's what you get.
Yeah, but especially around my neck. And I think I haven't been burned this bad in a while. But I think I haven't coached football. So it's been a year since I've coached football, so I haven't been out as much. And so you kind of build up the slow tan. You get that melanin.
Oh yeah.
Is it melanin?
Melanin, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
melatonin is the thing that makes you go to sleep.
That's right.
Yeah. So yeah, nice. But whew.
Well, just wait. Later on this podcast, I might burn you pretty good too.
Okay.
Maybe roast you.
All right.
We'll see if it's equivalent.
That'll be good. All right.
Well, that segues seamlessly.
Just completely seems like it's really related.
Because when I think of sunburn, I think of Abraham.
Right.
And Romans 4.
Right.
But Romans, our sermon number 9 that we're into.
It's a lot. And I even started, I typed sermon 8 when I was doing the notes, and then I went over to copy something, and I saw another sermon 8 in there. I was like, oh no, this must be sermon 9. But sermon 9, we're finally talking about Father Abraham. So let's take it to the next level.
From the hearts of the Low Country in South Carolina.
It's the Take 2 podcast, where we take theology to the next level. All right, Romans 4, 1 through 12, Father Abraham.
What a great sermon, great title.
Yeah.
Great content.
Great song.
And great, spoiler alert, we'll see. Is it a great song?
Maybe.
We'll talk about that later. I love it.
So Joel, he still reads the newspaper. And if you didn't know that, if you attended our church for any number of sermons, you're going to see him hold up a newspaper and talk about the Post and Courier and ask how many people read it. There's 2 other people in there that read it. But talked about this article about a crisis in childcare holding back moms with college degrees. So I guess he didn't really go into the article very much, but it was basically moms who have degrees who want to enter the workforce but can't find childcare available for their kids. So another crisis. And he's like, basically every day there's some crisis reported, something. Whether it's opioid or Middle East or the border or keep going on. And really we should expect crises. I guess that's the plural of crisis. Crises.
Sounds right to me. Yeah.
Because we just went through all this talk about sin.
Yeah.
And with fallen mankind, we're going to mess things up. We're going to create these crises. Good news. There has been a righteousness revealed from God, and he's going to fix it all. Maybe not, but there is a salvation plan for us individually and then for the whole world. And so from there, re-shows the Jensen graph and talks about we just moved out of this section in sin, moved into this section on salvation. And so last podcast that we talked about Roman stuff, we went over this. We have been declared right before God's eyes. That was justification, set free from our slavery to sin, redemption. And then because of the sacrifice of Christ, we have appeased God's holy indignation towards sin, and that's propitiation.
Love it. And all these theological terms are so rich and talk about this justification. And Paul doesn't stop there. And I think that's so smart because you make a claim, people want you to back it up. Like, show me how that applies to me, or show me how that's been evident, because if you're a Jew, you're thinking, hey, I know my Old Testament scriptures. Doesn't seem like that's the way it goes. And Paul says, I will show you through not some random guy, Abraham, and then a little bit of David too, right?
Yeah. And you chose Abraham and David for your basketball team.
Hey, I feel valid. I didn't even think. I feel validated here, and I just love how Paul develops a whole chapter. Not that he was writing in chapters, but that he goes to great lengths. He doesn't just throw out Abraham in passing, but really spends some time, because Abraham is such a pivotal character. Joel gave this quote by MacArthur that talked about through rabbinical teaching, popular Jewish belief that really Abraham's righteousness, the way he lived, they might read that and say that's how he merited salvation. So he's going to kind of look at that figure and say, no, it's through faith as well.
It's kind of odd, though, because Abraham has a lot of downs. You know, he has some ups, but he has a lot of downs in his life, too. So you're wondering, like, why would they think that he was good enough to merit his righteousness by his deeds?
Yeah, that's a really good point, where when I was teaching through Romans, like in my mind, I know he wasn't perfect, but I'm kind of right there with the Jews, like this great guy. But a lot of the pushback from the college kids were like, there's a lot of times he messed up, and I was like, wow, they were so fixated on all these mistakes. And maybe that's a really good reason why Paul centered on him too, that he's this great figure, but definitely not perfect. You couldn't, maybe if you picked Joseph or something, you might say maybe he was perfect, but he picked Abraham intentionally, and I think that's powerful.
Yeah, so the first 4 verses, let me read those out of the NASB. I see you have the ESV ready to go, but I think the viewers want the one that's more...
I would love to see, just a preferred translation. Yeah,
maybe we should do a Spotify poll. It would have been good to do one on the one we did on translations, but hey, we're just figuring things out then. So, but lest we digress, what then shall we say that Abraham, our forefather according to the flesh, has found? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Now to the one who works, his wage is not credited as a favor, but as what is due. But to the one who does not work, but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is credited as righteousness.
I love that he not only talks about Abraham, but then he kind of explains, like, okay, get the big picture. You can't, if you work for it, it's not a gift. Like, he's like making sure people understand this, and talks about this term credited or reckoned. And I know from your sermon, you have this great example ready to go.
Oh yeah. I didn't know. Yeah. I always wonder like how much to put in, but so when I preach the sermon, and this is probably redundant because I put the link in there, I'm sure all of our viewers, including you, Zach,
of course,
went and re-listened to it. But if you own a business and you own your own business and you have kids, it might be the case that you want to do something that's legal, all legal,
above board,
but helps you with taxes and stuff. Take advantage of the things that are there. Yeah. And so when Jill was younger, her dad was a farmer, so she would go maybe a couple days out of the year and pull weeds for a couple of hours. Then, you can pay your kid, basically whatever rate you want, hourly wage you want there, that makes sense with your tax bracket. Because basically that money from the business point gets spent. Like your business is spending that money, it comes off of your business profits. But from your family standpoint, then that money goes to your child, and you can use that money for expenses. So it kind of helps you avoid paying taxes on money in your business, but still keep it in there. But so the point is,
well, is the point that for this podcast venture that Phoebe's going to get a job? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. As soon as we have so much revenue from the podcast that we need to figure out some way to get some debits in there to
offset
deductions. That would be good.
The good news is she's young, so we got some time to grow this thing.
But so the point of that illustration was, even though she did just a small amount of work, she still earned that money. Even made me think, wow,
Even a kid, yeah.
It wasn't in proportion to what she got, but she still earned it. It wasn't a gift in the eyes of the law. And so in the eyes of the law, any mixture of work now takes this away from a gift.
And I'll point this out too. In Romans chapter 4, he mentions credited or reckoned, I think 11 times is what Pastor Joel mentioned. So he's like hitting this over, just like with sin, hitting it over and over and over again. He's hitting this, lest, the Jews think he's just saying stuff about Abraham. He's taking quotes from Genesis 15. He's quoting scripture. I think all of this is significant as he's making a case. He's using these quotes. He's using his terms over and over again. He's making it very, very clear before he transitions very briefly to David.
Yeah. And so, did you want to read the quote from Genesis 15?
Genesis 15:6.
I mean, I've got it here in our notes. If you wanted, I just didn't know if you were wanting to skip over that or not.
Go ahead and read that bad boy.
Yeah. So this quote in Romans where it says Abraham believed and was credited as righteousness is actually taken from part of the establishment of the Abrahamic covenant. So Genesis 12, Genesis 15, Genesis 18, key places where the Abrahamic covenant are established. And it is in this Genesis 15 passage where Paul quotes from. And so starting verse 1, it says, after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision saying, do not fear, Abram, I am a shield to you. Your reward shall be very great. Abram said, O Lord, what will you give me since I am childless and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus? And Abram said, since you have given no offspring to me, one born in my house is my heir. Then behold, the word of the Lord came to him saying, this man will not be your heir, but one who will come forth from your own body, he shall be your heir. And he took him outside and said, now look towards the heavens and count the stars. We can't skip it if it's counting the stars.
Of course.
Part. Yeah. And count the stars if you're able to count them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. Then he believed in the Lord and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. So that's quote comes at the very end. So we have this scene where God's basically saying, Abraham, I'm going to bless you. Just like I told you in Genesis 12, it's going to be from your own loins. Come out here, look at the stars.
If you can count them.
If you can count them, that's going to be a picture of your descendants. Abraham believed and he was credited as righteousness. So that was when Abraham was 86 years old.
Yeah, that's good. Hang on to that because we want to remember that.
Yeah.
As we shift to David, I'm going to give the listeners what I think they really want, which is a little ESV action. In verse 6, Paul writes, just as David also speaks of the blessings of the one to whom God counts righteousness apart from works. Then he's quoting a psalm, blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord will not count his sin. And I like this because it's talking about really our wages. Like if we are counting what we've done, it's sin.
Right.
And so it's a good thing
right.
that it's something, faith, righteousness is being credited to us, right? And then I don't know what I see here, but I'm really happy you put this in.
Yeah. So I was sitting there and I was looking over those verses and it was just like I could hear Zach's voice during the middle of the sermon going, chiasm. So I went and looked and I found,
this is nice.
Is Psalm 32 considered a chiasm? And it's got a pretty in-depth structure from verse 1 through 5, 6 through 11, and then the 1 through 11 inclusion. So we can put this graphic up
that.
here.
Yeah, that's nice.
But kind of shows how there's, I think if I'm reading this right, there's basically like two chiasms together, and and then that makes a full chiasm for the whole psalm. So David, he had his Hebrew poetry formats down.
That's awesome. And so Paul brings up Abraham. Paul brings up David. And his point is the same point that he made at the end of chapter 3, where he says, what becomes of our boasting? Really, no one can boast. And if anyone could boast, you might think Abraham is pretty good, pretty prominent guy. David had some good times being king, but even they cannot boast.
That's right. Yeah. And Joel brings it home with this illustration basically on how evil we are and how much we boast. And so apparently there's this Zimbabwe Mr. Ugly contest that's held annually. And one gentleman, I'm not going to even pronounce his name.
Tough one.
Apparently has won for several years. And then an upstart won this time, and the long-standing Mr. Ugly for Zimbabwe was upset because he was like, I have a natural ugliness,
Right.
but this other dude is only ugly when he opens his mouth because he's missing his teeth. And so,
tough.
yeah, but he was boasting in his ugliness.
I'm going to be honest. I was expecting much uglier.
Yeah, so Joel showed us a picture, and it didn't seem like his, symmetry is a big deal in our perceived beauty. And his face was, it didn't look ugly to me at all, but maybe in Zimbabwe, that's...
Maybe everyone is just beautiful in Zimbabwe.
That's right.
Do some research here. And so there's no boasting. The way God works really is much different than the way that man works. And Pastor Jill cites this 1 Corinthians 1, 26 through 31 passage that basically says that he's kind of flipped the script in part, right? Or totally.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that no one from a earthly standard who's rich or is wise, but when you look at your earthly wealth or your earthly wisdom, it pales in comparison. But we weren't chosen because of those things.
Yeah, that'd be a real mistake. Yeah. And if you think that you're just, how are you reading this without getting called out? That man, it's like Abraham, David. It's really everyone, and that leads to I don't know if Pastor Drill regrets this illustration, "Oh Happy Day," because he got put on the spot. I think at the end to close us out with that song.
Yeah. So we sang it twice, and I think one of the big things was that's not the song that Joel knows. That is the Sister Act Whoopi Goldberg version of "Oh Happy Day." It's not the hymn from 1759 or something. We looked it up. Maybe we should have an outro or something with that hymn.
There
playing.
you go. Throw it in there. Yeah, I love it. Which, as we go through chapter 4, brings us to our next topic, circumcision.
Yeah.
Michael, you want to break it down for us?
Yeah. My wife was sitting there next to me, and she's like, why do we always talk about circumcision? I was like, buckle up, because we're going to have some more of it. And if you read through Paul, Galatians, Colossians, it's a reoccurring thing because it was such a huge cultural issue for the Jews. It was what marked them apart from the Gentiles, and it's what they believed was a sign that they were God's chosen people. So they looked to circumcision as a marker that we're chosen by God.
I love that you have this quote by you. Jill's got this quote in the notes. This is so great. Well, you were alluding to this, or you were breaking down the timeline that in Genesis 15, when this righteousness is credited to him, reckoned to him, he's 86. You told us to remember that. He's justified.
He's justified, declared righteous at 86. The sign of circumcision doesn't come until Genesis 17, when Abraham and his whole household are circumcised, and he's 99. And Jill turns to me in the middle of the sermon like, he was circumcised at 99? I'm like, that's pretty rough.
That's not a great time. But looking at the distance in years, I think everyone would say, Genesis 17 is after 15, but I don't think people realize that it's over a decade later.
Yeah. And so Paul is going to raise this question in verses 9 through 12 about circumcision. He says, is this blessing then on the circumcised or on the uncircumcised also? For we say faith was credited to Abraham as righteousness. How then was it credited, while he was circumcised or uncircumcised? Not while circumcised, but while uncircumcised. And he received the sign of circumcision as a seal of righteousness of faith, similar to how we are saved prior to us being baptized. But then baptism is kind of like this outward sign of an inward reality. Circumcision was supposed to kind of be that for them as well. Verse 11 again, and he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of the righteousness of the faith which he had while uncircumcised, so that he might be the father of all who believe without being circumcised, that righteousness might be credited to them, and the father of circumcision to those who not only are of the circumcision, but who also follow in the steps of faith of our father Abraham, which he had while uncircumcised.
That's a
lot of words.
That's a tongue twister.
But it's like Paul is trying to close in every side. So basically, summary of those verses: Abraham is accounted as righteous while he's uncircumcised. That way, the Gentiles who are uncircumcised can count him as a father.
Yeah.
If they have the faith that Abraham had, he is their spiritual father. But then he's also circumcised. That's a sign for the Jews, and the Jews who are both circumcised and had that faith can also count him as a father. And Paul's really basically saying only those who have faith, whether you're circumcised or uncircumcised, can count Abraham as a father.
That's the common denominator, and that probably would have hit the Jews' ears very rough. Like they'd be taken aback, saying, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! These Gentiles not circumcised, like they don't have this covenant sign. You mean they?" And he's very clear with what you just read, that faith is the basis. We've got this quote, Pastor Joel, in here that talks about how much of a shock it would have been to the Jewish reader to read this, that faith is that vital link and not circumcision, that faith is what you want, not if you're going to only have one, it's not the sign, right?
Right. Yep.
Which brings us to, really being critiquing this classic song.
Yeah. Father Abraham had many sons. And Jill, while we're singing this, she's already, I'm like, no, it's not time. It's not time. We don't have that right arm going. We got to get through one of these verses.
And I wonder when that song was written, because it has some staying power. It's been, I think everyone I've ever talked to knows that song.
Yeah,
if you grew up in church.
I had these, like when I was young, I was like, yeah, we're all sons of Father Abraham. And then when I got older, I'm like, I'm not a son of Father Abraham. I'm a Gentile. But then when I looked at the text more closely, it is true. And Joel brings out that is the one redeeming quality of this song, is it really highlights the fact that he has many sons and daughters, like the stars in the sky.
Yeah, the way Paul is talking, I think you're right. Like people think about Jew, Gentile, and even you go back a couple of chapters, a Jew is one inwardly. It's just such a paradigm shift for so many people. But yeah, Pastor Joel taking shots at Father Abraham being a goofy song. And so he moves to application after that, and as he often does, really hits some of these personal, introspective questions. Do you have the faith of Abraham? Because that's the vital component. If you don't have this faith, righteousness is not credited to you. It's not reckoned to you. On the flip side of this, application number 2, are you boasting in Christ? Are you making that a priority to tell people about Christ? That's where you find your identity, and it's not just this compartmentalized thing that's to the side. And as we've been going through this, there's been this encouragement to be in Romans, read these different sections, take some time to read this section as a whole, 3:21 through 5:21, and then get to work on the memory side of things, all these different passages the Romans Road, and then he kind of does not develop this, but encourages us to look at Colossians. What does the New Testament say about circumcision of the hearts? All really good applications.
Yeah, very good. So now maybe I just had some thoughts here. Maybe you had some other thoughts about things that we could talk about. I've not done a whole lot of research into this topic.
Really? You don't have textbook after textbook on circumcision?
No. But I have read, I've heard Greg Kokel talk about how, because someone called in and was like, well, circumcision wasn't even original with the Jews. They got it from the Egyptians. And I guess there is, and he's like, yeah. So like I said, I haven't researched it, but I guess there is some evidence that the Egyptians were the first people to circumcise. I don't know how long that continued. Yeah. I just was wondering from the Jews' perspective, because they put all this emphasis on circumcision, what they would think about other cultures who circumcise, and what does it maybe a Jew today, because Muslims circumcise and largely Christians, especially American Christians, still circumcise. If that plays into their role, what they think about that, how does that play out? They probably say, yeah, you're circumcised, but you're not keeping the law.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah.
I don't know.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Did you
something to ponder.
Yeah.
I never knew Egyptian circumcision was. I just don't know. I don't know. I don't have that background in circumcision. But check out Greg Kokel's got the facts on everything.
Yeah.
Covers the gamut.
I think. Well, he's been in the business for so long. He's going to get peppered with questions
he's
all over.
I'm sure.
So
they're looking for every obscure way to break down Christianity, right? What about this?
Yeah.
I like your second one, talking about when was Abraham saved, because I think a lot of people at some point in time, does the Old Testament operate differently? Like they were saved by sacrifices, but now we're not. But Abraham was by faith. Like this is important to get right?
Yeah. And I wonder if it happened that night, like if all the times when he's, because he's called out of the Ur of the Chaldeans, and it almost seems like his father Terah was called too, but
it seems like that.
Was reluctant. And then they make it as far as Haran, I believe, and Abraham's father dies there. And I think Abraham kind of stays there, if I'm remembering my history right. So, and then God's basically called him like, yep, you got to keep coming to this land that I'm calling you to. So you would think maybe somewhere along there he had already believed and it was counted as righteous, but then maybe God makes it, explicit here in Genesis 15, or was Abraham not saved until this night where you get called out to see the stars? I mean, stars can be overwhelming.
Especially when you're talking to God.
A moon comes in front of it, it can be pretty big. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where I said. I think I would probably fall on Genesis 15. Seems like a good place to count on. That was the moment.
For sure by then.
Yeah. But I think it's good to emphasize too that I just hear when people talk, they just don't make that connection that Old Testament saints are saved in the same way New Testament saints are.
Right.
I mean, Dave Ramsey, not a big fan of credit, but in this case, I think he would agree that Abraham was saved on credit, so to speak,
right.
and maybe we're saved looking back on debit. But I think it's easy just to look at sacrifices, and I don't know. It's just like you hear people talk. It's like you got to get that faith component right.
Yeah. And so if we weren't clear, those Old Testament folks saved by faith in what was revealed to them at the time. Clearly, as New Testament saints, we have more revealed to us. So the object of our faith has more details. Like we know exactly how it's going to come, but we don't have all the details. I'm sure there's things that we don't know that will come about as time goes on and Jesus returns and stuff, and our faith is made sight. So
I think that's really good. And we've talked about this before, but this timing is so important. James, when he talks about it, he talks about a different timing component, different stage. And so these are compatible, kind of fit together. And I like how Paul just draws out that time. I'm like, look at the timing. This is when he was circumcised. Then, this was before he was circumcised. Mm-hmm. That's really important because that's like the go-to. Yeah. James is different than Paul. So I think it's all good. That's all I got.
That's our take.
Happy day that fixed my choice on thee, my Savior and my God. Well, may this glowing heart rejoice and tell its raptures all abroad. Happy day, when Jesus washed my sins away. He taught me how to watch and pray and live rejoicing every day. Happy day, when Jesus washed my sins away.
Thanks for listening to Take Two. Find us wherever you find podcasts and on YouTube for those who want to watch our videocast.